Explain the phenomenon of American right-wingers sympathizing with Russia. Not sure if this is the correct sub to ask this question, but the name suggests it might be. It is as stated in the title. Why does a large portion of the American right seem to show sympathies with the Russian invasion of Ukraine? For clarification, I am not referring to the American right's more radical factions like the alt-right and its other supremacist leagues, since the reason for sympathies shown in these circles are quite obvious and expected. Rather, the question is directed at its more moderate majority, especially its talking heads and opinionators existing on TV, Fox News, and on YouTube and social media, Joe Rogan, Steven Crowder, Jordan Peterson, etc., whose opinions and takes on the war obviously trickle down to their millions of fans and watchers. When I say sympathies, I am not referring to an open support of Russia, of course. Rather, I am referring to an continuous spreading of false information about the war that near universally favors the Russian cause. A few examples. Reasoning about how Russia was in fact forced into invading its neighbors. Ignoring the efficacy of the Ukrainian army and generally spreading the opinion that it's only a matter of time before they lose. Criticizing all economic support for Ukraine as simply throwing gas on the fire and making it so more people will die. Just to name a few. A general tone of near-complete demoralization directed at the Ukrainian war effort in summation. From the POV of a non-American, I have a hard time making sense of the reason for this rhetoric and would like to ask the people if they can explain to me this phenomenon. What do they gain from it? No group is a monolith, and there are going to be different motivations for different people, but the overwhelming driving force behind most of this is the simple fact that the current right-wing shock jock influencer is driven primarily by contrarianism. They wait for liberals to take a stance, then choose the opposite. See for example these same influencers screaming about their enduring love for gas stoves when most of them lived in homes that didn't have gas stoves. For a lot of them, their like of Russia is because Putin isn't woke. That's it. They see him as a man defending traditional values. It's very, very simple. Donald Trump told them that he likes Russia. So all of them now like Russia. That's it. Their media networks were hacked a decade ago and went into overdrive during the Trump years. I'd say most right-wing messaging worldwide is being poked and prodded online by foreign interests for years. And there is no group more susceptible to being led off a cliff of outrage like conservatives. And their psychology tends towards us versus them. Once Russia saw how easy it was for Fox News to manipulate the base, they poured napalm onto the fire. Because some of the leaders are bought by Russia. Jared told years ago that they don't need banks because Russia provides them credit. The right-wing evangelical movement has been in bed with Russia for quite some time. A large part of it has to do with the Russian Orthodox Church and American evangelicals bonding over their love of homophobia. Franklin Graham's ties to Russia are well documented. Incidentally, the current head of the Russian Orthodox Church is a former KGB agent. The far-right are not the freedom-loving, flag-waving patriots they claim to be and are constantly moving closer and closer to going full-on with fascist authoritarian beliefs, which brings them in line with backing Putin and Russia. Russia is white-dominated, bigoted, xenophobic and controlled by an oligarchy. Sound familiar? The conservative movement has flourished under the tender care of Russian sips for decades now. Of course they're going to be sympathetic. The right wing was corrupted back in the 2016 election with Russian propaganda. The Mueller investigation showed this as fact. They just couldn't prove collusion, which is what the investigation was for. Since then Russia has doubled down with their American propaganda to both bolster support for themselves and further division of our nation. After seeing the defamation lawsuit with Fox, it's pretty clear that every right-wing media source is propaganda and not a platform for policy. Fascists like and respect other fascists, especially fascists that run a large country with nuclear weapons. 1. Mainstream Americans don't support Russia when it invades another country. Right-wingers take the opposite view. 2. Trump supported Russia because Putin played on Trump's personal greed and ego. Right-wingers follow. As someone who grew up in the Reagan era, it's completely baffling. There was no bigger enemy, and Russia policy was behind pretty much all of our military spending. From Top Gun to Red Dawn to James Bond, we were told to hate Russia. Now Putin is trying to put the Union back together, and the right is all for it? Once upon a time I used to be a conservative, now I can't even recognize them. Easy. The rich elite are part of the nation, agnostic, globally rich, and they've been bribed to hell and back, with promises of more money to come. The Republican poor have been shown Russia is an unapologetic white nationalist Christian LGBTQ-hating nation with unlimited power to brutalize their enemies, and that Russia is willing to help them against their one true enemies, the libs. A true match made in hell. I don't think most Americans conservatives support Russia per se. They just hate the establishment more. I'm surprised you think that the moderate right is more sympathetic toward Russia. I thought it was the opposite. Didn't Lindsey Graham, an establishment Republican, say that killing Russians is the best thing the country has spent our taxes on? And I'm pretty certain that McConnell is pro-Ukraine as well. Pure contrarianism, nothing more. Whatever the left support, they will take the opposite position. They have very little positions of their own. You say that the reasons behind sympathy from the far right wings are clear and obvious. I would suggest to you that the reasons are the same for conservatives at large, because the foxes have taken over the hen house. The GOP narrative is by and large run by the alt-right today. It is purely 100% reactionary. The Democrats and the establishment are anti-Russia, so they're pro. Plus Russia helped their guy win, and they're too short-sighted to care why. It's just enemy of my enemy is a friend. Helpful that it helps push authoritarianism, but that's a side benefit. Really helps the anti-NATO crowd too. It is completely irrational, and entirely against prior policy of the USA, but most importantly Trump is a Putin sympathizer. It goes against the grain, which is literally the entirely point of the GOP these days, and Trump agrees with it. That is all you need to know. I am convinced for 90% of members of the GOP they simply believe whatever you tell them these days, and the angrier you make them about it and more you tell them they are wrong, the more they are sure they are right. 1. Trump seems to be pro-Putin and people seem to blindly follow his lead. 2. The left seems to be pro-Ukraine, which automatically makes a lot of people on the right anti-Ukraine. They see Putin's regime as bright example of authoritarian, militaristic, conservative rule. It seems that one peculiar behavior of authoritarian personalities is to support authoritarian leaders regardless of nationality. CPAC was held in Hungary as well. There was an Indian man who did a hunger strike until he died to support Trump. Hungarians who support Orbán also favored Trump. They care less about the country than which leaders tell them they will solve everything, idolize violence, and to blame out groups for their personal problems. It's why Trump was so friendly with every dictator in the world and had an infatuation with Kim Jong-un as well. Russian propaganda has been infiltrating conservative media for many years now. MAGA Republicans are especially overexposed to direct disinformation from the Kremlin. So now they are basically parroting Russian propaganda. From Tucker Carlson to our owned by Putin. It's amazing that they lack the ability to think independently about this. They have turned on their own country in the service of a dictator. Personally, I think it's simple: the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You expected rationality? Right-wingers perceive Russia as a white Christian country with conservative values akin to their own.